Welcome, Mississippi State fans, to Davis Wade Stadium, Scott Field, on the campus of Mississippi State University, where the Bulldogs are victors again, defeating and visiting UMASS. But, Steve, I know I wrote a column last week saying the Bulldogs had not been tested in a full four-quarter game. Well, they got their test today.
They did, and this is probably the one game, David, you probably wouldn't have expected to be a real test. But, in hindsight, looking back, this was the classic trap game. State goes on the road, plays an A&M team that many people expected to be a shootout, and State wins that ball game, and you've got Alabama next week. So it's safe to say the Bulldogs sleptwalked through the first half with this early kick time today, and they came off a road win last week. So I can't say we're totally surprised, not to mention the fact, too, UMass hadn't been a team that's been blown out. We pointed that out yesterday. Nobody's beat them worse than 10 points until today when the Bulldogs beat them by 11, but it was not the crisp showing that many Bulldog fans hoped for.
Yeah, I thought a quote by Nick Fitzgerald kind of summed up really well, and for that matter, he spoke for a lot of you fans when he said, 11 o'clock games, sometimes you just have to make your own juice because there was not a lot of that out there, not a lot of electricity. We expected that. The weather had a little bit to do with it, very overcast day. At the same time, you've got a Bulldog team that was 16 in the college football playoff rankings. You think they're carrying a little momentum with a three-game win streak. Yes, they took care of business. Looking at the big picture, though, you and I have seen a lot of games like this. The Bulldogs lost, and we're going back a long ways. They won. They did what they had to do, so that's a positive. And they came out strong in the third quarter. If not for maybe one interesting play selection there, they probably blow this one out in the second half. Did they really need a test?
David, I think they did, but that being said, a lot of the reasons that UMass hung around today is because of some self-inflicted wounds from the Bulldogs. You had the RPO for the pick six right out of the gate. You could say Reggie Todd didn't break back hard enough on the quarterback, or Nick shouldn't have thrown the football. But either way, it's a pick six. That's a self-inflicted wound. Then you extend the drive with a needless unsportsmanlike conduct penalty on Montez Sweat.
Which was a tone that the State had a lot of defensive penalties in second and third down situations that gave free first downs.
It's true. And then you have the targeting call on Jonathan Abram. It's kind of an unfortunate call because of the fact the quarterback kind of turned into him. It's kind of a low target anyway, and kind of like Dan Mullen said in the postgame, if you go much lower to the legs, it's a personal foul the other way. It's just kind of more of an unfortunate thing. I don't think there was any intent to injure. That was a big play in the ball game for State. You get off the field there, it's a different dynamic. But you're right, David. You have Reggie Todd throw one of the most beautiful passes we've seen at Scott Field this year, and just overthrew Jesse Jackson. And two times today, Jesse Jackson had one where the guy just out-muscled him for the football and ripped it away from him. And UMass came in here, to their credit, as a 2-6 team. Yes, they'd won 2 in a row. They did not respect Mississippi State. They came in here expecting to win the ball game, and Coach Mark Whipple's team acquitted itself very well today.
Since we're focusing on the negatives early right here, I guess if I had to say, part of the problem, State's missing Keith Mixon. It's missing several, of its first-line receivers today, which we kind of sort of expected. And Donald Gray's out. And Coach Mullen said it'll be midweek before they know whether he's going to practice and play for Alabama. Still, you think guys are going to step up there and fight for some balls, and they really didn't go after them as hard as they could have some plays, and probably didn't get the perimeter blocking they needed in the past. That shows the advantage of experienced wide receivers. To me, though, Steve, the two most disappointing things. The offensive line just really struggled against the group. They outweighed by a significant margin. They looked so good last week against Texas A&M, and then today the line is really struggling.
Especially on the interior, David, and that's where I thought State really struggled to find some running room, and that's been the bread and butter of this offense. You're able to hit Harris Williams inside on the dive. When it's not there, Nick Fitzgerald's able to pull it and get outside for the sweep. But, they spied Nick most of the day. They had a linebacker that was assigned to him throughout the day, and then what happened was the Bulldogs couldn't go to their bread and butter. So when you came out in that second half, and to the Bulldogs' credit, that's what they did. They came out and really took charge in that third quarter and just basically showed UMass, you know what, we're the bigger team, we're the SEC team, we're fixing to put this game away. And they did. And Todd Grantham's defense played much better in the second half. They were able to get off blocks, and he had a lot more tackles for loss, which you really had a UMass team that struggled to find anything down the field in the second half, and that ultimately was the ball game.
If not for one big hit. And give them credit. They called timeout on a 3rd and 1 when State went out there with a heavy run defense package, called a pass play, hit a 69-yard play, and all of a sudden it's back to being game again just when State thought they had it put away. But again, the defense made enough plays to make sure. They forced a couple of punts. One was returned by Dedrick Thomas, obviously the play of the game there. Looking at it, though, in other senses, though, this was a game State needed in some ways to really give them an emotional test. And I thought it was interesting that we all asked Dan Mullen, what was your halftime talk? And we asked players. And basically told them, and not a lot of yelling, not a ranting and raving. He says sometimes you hear defensive guys saying to each other, hey, we got to do this. Offensive guys, hey, give me the ball. He said, wasn't much of that. He calmed them down and said, just go out and do what you do, which showed they thought they were the better team, and they were the better team. And they made enough plays to beat a really scrappy visiting squad. And let's also say this. State probably had this in them at some point this season.
It's true, David. You know, and from a coaching standpoint, if you look at Dan Mullen, now granted it's Alabama week now officially, but there's some teachable moments from this ball game that you can use to really get them locked in for next week. And, you know, one of the things that I'll say about Alabama is the teams that have come out and played loose and played confident have been able to play with Alabama. If you come out and play scared, you're going to get blown out, as we saw last year. But, you know, this is a different Bulldog team. Last year you went down there kind of hoping not to get your quarterback hurt. This year you're 7-2. Bulldog fans, you're 7-2. And there have been many years we would have hoped to have won 7 ball games. But the Bulldogs have 3 more games to play. Should be favored in 2 of those 3 because there's some ball games left to play around the conference today that will kind of determine the pecking order. But that's a big ball game because it's the next ball game, as Des Harris says. Bulldog fans, you need to be here. Many people weren't here today, and despite the best efforts of the coaching staff and administration, it was a better crowd than BYU, David, but there was not a lot of juice on the field or in the stands early, but that'll change next weekend.
So Mississippi State manages to pull this one out. But keep in mind, too, they trailed UMass in the third quarter last year in Foxborough as well, so nothing really stunning there. Just UMass just played a good, hard game. And State was really pretty vanilla in a lot of ways. They did come out with the gadget plays. One worked. They lined Jamal Peters up at wide receiver, let him run the ball, got 9 yards. Then they come back with a gadget play, which, by the way, I was told by people who observe practice, they practiced that a lot this week with Reggie Todd throwing. He's got the arm. Said half the time it worked in there. The half the time it didn't work, it really didn't work. And the other thing about that play, too, if he tucks the ball and runs, he gains 15 yards. Probably State just goes on and takes control. But maybe in the big picture, they needed a test like this emotionally, physically, mentally, how they'd respond to it. And now they get to focus entirely on Alabama. Quickly, a few statistics there. Nick Fitzgerald and Eris Williams both, once again, I think, 5th time, maybe 6th in their careers. Now both go over 100 yards. That's a record. Fitzgerald becomes the number 4 SEC rushing quarterback, passing some guy named Bond. Yeah, John Bond.
And Mansell.
Yes. I talked to Bond on the sideline, and he was saying, yeah, now y'all can quit talking about me all the time. And, of course, the big play in the kicking game. State, they were looking for another guy to give some spark in the punting game, and there, Dedrick Thomas, who, by the way, Dan Mullen said was the number 5 kick returner in camp, all of a sudden you're down a bunch of bodies, you have no choice, you put him there, and look what he does.
Yeah, I mean, you're missing Donald Gray and you're missing Gabe Miles, and those are guys that are sure-handed, and you hated to be in that situation, but it's ironic. I was sitting there speaking with Mike Nemeth right before the punt return. I said, you know, with these young returners, the return game has been good. Reggie Todd nearly breaks one for a touchdown. If he keeps his feet after hurdling a player, he might take it the distance, and then Dedrick Thomas does bring it the distance. And Jamal Peters, kind of an unsung hero in that play, gets 2 big blocks there. But that was the nail in the UMass coffin. But it was a play, too, David, because of the test. State needed to make a play. They made a play to put the game away. That's really the story of the day.
And really it was the only explosive play by Mississippi State. I mean, the longest rushing play. And Nick Fitzgerald, when he tucked and ran there in the third quarter, 30 yards. Other than that, the longest carry you have is 20 by Eris Williams. You don't have any big plays in the passing game. UMass lived on the explosive plays, but sooner or later that was going to come back to bite them because they just couldn't keep it consistent. So you just knew if State did not give it away like that pick 6 in the second quarter, you feel pretty good about the game. Now, how good you feel going to this week? Harder to say because Alabama certainly have all their attention. Will State lose any ground in the college football playoff rankings? Probably so, because some of those 2 teams that are 2 lost teams like State may slide up past them in the rankings because the pollsters look at it and say, yeah, UMass, a 2-7 team now. That's not really important. The key is kind of staying in that top 20, and then again, do what you can do against Alabama. We're realistic on that. We know it's going to be a huge uphill battle and a team that just stomped State, 53-3 last year in Tuscaloosa. This is the grown-up State team. I talked to them. They feel better about the chances. Jeffrey Simmons, who, by the way, I thought was a defensive MVP, had his most tackles in weeks because he finally got one-man tackling, blocking there. He's just said you've got to go in with a fresh attitude. You've got to know what you did wrong last week. You've got to cover the edges better. We know what Alabama's going to do. We have an idea that we can play defensively and then come out, and you just got to make some plays in the passing game offensively.
It's true, David. You know, the bottom line is State survives today. you seem to be healthy. We'll wait and hear what's happened with Gary Green. But you're going to go over there, a much better team than you went last year. You're going to be at home for one. Bulldog fans need to be here. But the bottom line is, David, you mentioned we're playing the number one team in the country. I don't think Mississippi State's going to be intimidated by that. And I think last year's ball game probably taught them the gap between them and Alabama. This is a more mature team, especially defensively. So we'll see what happens next Saturday.
And sometime this evening, we expect to find out the kickoff time for next week. Auburn took care of business, Texas A&M. So right now, I guess the popular guessing is State will play the 6 o'clock game against Alabama. 2:30 would be Auburn, Georgia. So no surprises there. But 6 o'clock, prime time. We don't know what the weather will be. We didn't expect this rain we had last night, but fortunately it cleared out in time. But there is no reason, none whatsoever, that for this top 20 matchup coming this week, this should be about as electric as it gets at Scott Field until an Egg Bowl.
No doubt about it. The recruits will be here. The fans will be here. It's already a sellout crowd, so tickets are going to be scarce. If you find them, get them in the hands of Bulldog fans. Make sure cowbells are clanging. Be here next Saturday.
And don't sell to people from across the state line. I know we all want the cash, but come on. If you hold that ticket, use it for your own people. And by the way, State fans, if you find people who do sell, feel free to put it on the message board about who sold their tickets to the hostile fans. It's time to crack down on things like that here at Scott Field. Okay, that's my preaching for the day. For Steve Robertson, who'll be giving some reports on what little recruiting news there was today. Not a whole lot, but you got a photo gallery, you and Gene Swindoll. Mike Nemes should have our Blitz story up by now. Paul Jones is working on a notebook, and Robbie Falk will be doing a feature. I'll be finishing up the game story and maybe even leaving here while the sun's still shining. So watch a little football this evening. It's Alabama week, Mississippi State. It is Alabama week. It is time to get ready, and we're going to give you wall-to-wall coverage during this coming week. So, this is David Murray from Scott Field, Davis Wade Stadium. Mississippi State wins again.